Hello and welcome to the Ask Me Anything on Twitch and YouTube. I'm pulling up PullGab here. I used to have a place where I could do PullGab and see the things on the screen. I have not put that in this configuration for OBS, so let's go to PullGab first. Just make sure there's no All right. So there is a question out on PullGab. And let me just add the PullGab question here. Oh, no. All right. So the PullGab question is how do you identify non-sargable queries and what techniques do you use to improve their performance? So non-sargable queries are ones that are going to cause you to have some scans, typically. Now, sargable means the search argument available or search argument able. And the reality is that searchable or seekable in an index is all about how you do the keys. So non-sargable queries just means that you aren't friendly to SQL when you have a predicate. So you do a where clause and you say where is null, column, comma, quote, quote, equals, comma, quote, quote, which just means really that you're trying to tell if that argument is null. And is null is a function and it will always cause scans. So that's not really a good thing. And the reality is that you identify those by looking in your query plans and noticing that they are scanning rather than seeking. And so that's really the answer to that. Thank you very much for that question. Appreciate you using PullGab, and it's not starting to show my question. Just a second here. All right, the second question. Same from Brian Boosie. I hope that's how you say your name. How do you use query hints like option recompile and option optimize for to optimize query performance? And the answer to that question really comes from what the hint is. So there's plenty and plenty and plenty of hints that come from lots of things. And let me make sure that my office hours is correct. I didn't realize that it was showing incorrectly. Let me make sure we're in the right office hours. Yeah, this is there we go. And that's better. Okay. So, yeah. So to answer the question about the recompile and option optimize for, typically people reach for hints when things go wrong. And I've seen it overused for optimize for. A lot of times when people use the optimize for, mostly you see optimize for unknown. It's a very kind of a common thing to say, hey, don't use statistics to tell me what should happen. And it's kind of like they don't want to believe statistics. They don't want the query optimizer to believe statistics. They just want to kind of optimize for what if the value is unknown, what do you do? And what you end up with is crap. So you end up with scans and you end up with other things that happen with optimize for. And in my experience, we had a platform that was a SaaS product and they did optimize for unknown because they thought that would help their plight in the way their code worked. They had skew is what it boiled down to. And in the skew they had, they believed that optimized for unknown was going to fix it. And what it did was it tanked everything. It tanked all the performance. When that query ran, it was just abysmal. And we took out the optimize for unknown and let the query optimizer use statistics, and all was so much better. So the reality is optimize for is a hint, yes. And once you get hinty, what you're telling the optimizer is that you know better than it. Now, option recompile is a special one. For me, option recompile really basically shows SQL that you need it to recompile because you don't want it to cache that plan. And that's okay. A lot of times people will use that the option recompile for in the 2017 and below, or even sometimes 2019, to get the actual rows in the table variables. It's really common. You use a table variable, you use it to join, and the join is going to optimize or estimate one, typically in a table variable. And people will use option recompile to recompile that so that the optimizer or the executor will actually go and look at how many rows are in the table variable. So sometimes it can be helpful. Also, if there's skew where you don't want it to store that plan, you want it to get the plan for the variable or for the value you want in the thing. So sometimes people will use option recompile to get rid of parameter sniffing. So those are the two scenarios I've seen it in. But basically, the side effects or option recompile is going to basically make sure that it doesn't store the plan and that it gets the statistics that it wants for that column. It's great, but I mean, I wouldn't overuse it because here's what happens. If you do option recompile on everything, you end up with a lot of CPU because it has to recompile every time it runs. So that's really two compiles, two optimizes when you run that. And so if you have thousands of queries running an hour, you're going to just elevate your CPU. Now, whether you'll gain something or not, that's another thing, but be careful with hints. Hints are trying to tell SQL that you're smarter than it most of the times. And sometimes that can be a not so favorable side effect. And maybe even not what you desired. You just thought you saw something out online and said, hey, I can use these hints. Hints are great when they're used properly. I know this sounds open-ended, but how do you balance the trade-offs between query performance and database optimization, like table partitioning and denormalization? Boy, great questions. The denormalization and the partitioning really, so I'll address both of them individually. Partitioning isn't about performance. It can be, but initially when you partition a table, you are really trying to maintain it better. So if you have a billion row table and you decide, you know what, I'm going to partition by date, because really that's, that the key makes sense. It's historical data. So you optimize the table and the maintenance by partitioning by date. So what happens there with partitioning is it allows you to take the data and split it into chunks. And those chunks are smaller than the billion rows. So now if the older data never gets modified, you don't have to maintain that index on that partition. It's just static, which is great, but we still don't have fill factor per partition. So don't have that. You can compress if you're doing it with Enterprise Edition, you can compress a partition and not the others, but you can't fill factor a partition yet. So that's not going to benefit you by keeping the hot data fill factor to 90 and then everything else is 100. But the big deal for maintenance is that you don't have to maintain that index on that partition when it hasn't fragmented because it wasn't touched. And then you can just maintain the most recent data. And that's helpful. The thing we also don't have is statistics per partition. We kind of have incremental statistics, but it's not the same. So you end up with statistics across the whole entire thing. But it's for maintenance first, not performance. You can gain performance with partition elimination if you include the partitioning key in the where clause. or join clauses or whatever. But in the predicates, you can actually use that partitioning key and actually get some pretty good performance because it'll partition eliminate. So if you say greater than last year, it will only look in the partitions that are greater than last year because it's partitioned by date. So you're happy there. The denormalization topic really is all about how many joins and whether you're querying that table a lot and whether or not you column store it or whether you compress it. So to me, denormalization is more about going wide because you're going to denormalize it. So normalization is really the idea of having a small table and a small table and you join them. The denormalization is taking those joins and making them one table so that they're just wider. They just have more data. And sometimes that can help because you're going to query that data and you're going to get it in one row instead of having to join it and then criteria things. And so you can gain some speed when you're writing fat queries or what we call decision support or warehouse queries. I mean, they have a lot of names, OLAP, all sorts of names, but denormalization is all about that. It has nothing to do with less storage, has everything to do with performance in that you're touching one table instead of three. Is that a consideration you want to do? That you can, and that's fine to do that. If your goal is accomplished, but you have to think about the what's first. Always think about the what's in your process of what do I need, what do I want, what do I have, and then you go after the hows. Once you've determined what you need, you go after the hows, especially in denormalization, because denormalization can make your database bigger. It can duplicate data, which is the antithesis of normal form. So as you go deeper, first normal, second normal, third normal, fourth normal, fifth normal, you start getting smaller and more tables and more joins. And so when you go up from third normal, which is typical of everybody, most people think in third normal. When you go second and first, there's a lot of duplication. So just be careful of what you want. Then you go after the hows and you figure that out. And you figure out whether you use partitioning, whatever you use to make them smaller entities to maintain. That's the biggest piece with denormalization is the maintenance starts to cost a lot because if you rebuild the primary key or the clustered key, yeah, that's a lot of data that's going to shove in the log and it's all duplicated, which is not so awesome. And you got to decide that. That's your prerogative to decide that. All right. Next question. Boy, Brian's going crazy. Do you have an opinion on storage of XML JSON objects for the intent of parsing that data in SQL Server? My company insists that this should be done at the database level, but I feel it should be handled at the business logic application layer. Should I insist this and how? Yeah, that's a very political question. A lot of developers or businesses would love to store all their stuff in JSON or XML. JSON's the new XML, and it is actually a lot more compact than XML. XML's got tags, and it can be very verbose. The reality is this. Today you have XML indexes that could make XPathing faster, but really in the end it's all just unstructured data, right? You can have a schema associated with if you want. You can have things that help things be better. But really, in the end, it's unstructured data. It's not like you can go and take a table and a column. And it's not like that in XML or JSON. Here's the value of JSON and XML, is that when you query that row, you get back a lot of stuff that's text that the application understands. Now, what I hear in the question is whether or not this should be done at the database level or in the application. And the reality is it depends. So there are functions in the later versions of SQL to parse JSON and to parse XML. XML has been out there for a long time. There's OpenXML. There's the XQuery that you can shred it with XPath and stuff like that, and that's nice. The bigger deal really is why you're doing it. Why in heaven's name are you doing it? Why is it in the database? Why is it not in some NoSQL database or something that's faster to retrieve that kind of data? The reality is that lots of people have SQL Server, so SQL Server is the repository. So it's the public toilet that people want to use that to store it. So you may not get the luxury of saying, It has to be stored outside of SQL. The bigger piece is, number one, deciding how often you query it. If it's a configuration set and you're storing it for configuration purposes, great. If it queries once a month, then store it in the database and live with the fact that you can compress the crap out of it when you back it up, right? You back it up with compression and it squishes the text right really well. Text squishes well. If you're using it as an application store, like, hey, I just want to store the cart and I want to store the checkout, then you may decide to not do that in XML and have to shred it when it works inside your relational world. Relational and non-relational are two worlds you have to live in, and you may decide that you don't want to do unstructured data inside SQL. It's possible, and it's even okay in some cases. There's sometimes it makes it very handy to have some unstructured data. You don't have to do sparse columns or things like that in SQL, but you get the luxury of having it in there. Just be careful of how much you shred it inside SQL Server. SQL Server is really good at relational engines and predicates and joins and all that things, group bys and sums. But when you start doing a lot of shredding inside SQL, you are far better off sucking that data out and parsing it in .NET or languages that really do well with JSON or XML. So to me, I would marry the two. I'm okay with storing it to a certain degree, but I wouldn't shred it. If I could get away with it, I would have a layer inside your application to shred it and then to store it. I mean, just push it in, but I wouldn't shred it in SQL if you had to store it there, and that was the decision made. That's my take. Let's see. Let's see, from SQL Dev DBA, what are your thoughts on using PowerShell's invoke REST method for data acquisition and DBA tools import table data CSV to push it into staging table in SQL Server for APIs? I'm not exactly trying to reinvent SSIS, but at the same time, it is much quicker for proofs of concept. And I agree with you. I don't see anything wrong semantically, right, or philosophically. Invoke REST method is there on purpose because there are lots of REST APIs out there that you can get data for things. So I wouldn't be so stuck on SSIS in many cases. The SSIS is a very structured place to do ETL, like literally extract, transform, load, or ELTs, where you extract, you transfer, you load it, you extract and load it, and then you transform it afterwards. It has a high level of transformation language inside SSIS and lots of operators to do so. I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time developing SSIS to pull data like REST methods unless you're going to do massive amounts of data. If you're just pulling data from REST methods for things like CUs or even if you got to 10,000 rows, I don't even think I'd much care. I'd just do it in PowerShell because it's a lot more versatile. You don't have to compile it. Sometimes it does operate faster because it doesn't have an engine behind it and startup and tear down costs that you have in memory. So I wouldn't be so worried about using PowerShell's invoke REST method or other things in PowerShell to allow you to get things done maybe a little faster, maybe a little more efficient than doing SSIS. SSIS is just a big tool, and I don't know that I'd go there. That's my personal opinion. I don't know that I'd go there for what you're doing, and I'd rather use PowerShell's invoke REST method and other things to do stuffing data in and pushing data out and stuff like that with that. So that's my opinion, especially for proof of concepts. That's for sure. SQL Dev DBA, good afternoon, loving the stream layout. That's good. Yeah, I love OBS. I'm still learning, still got it good. I actually have another scene that actually has the question up here on the screen, but for now, I'm not sure why I can't show the question. It doesn't actually show up on my now showing. So I'm not sure what's broken on my world here, but it may be because I don't have that URL in my in my list. I'll fix it for next time and make sure that PolGab's on this Ask Me Anything. It usually is right here on the side of me so that you can see it. Do you have any upcoming plans on talks, demos regarding a specific topic at a later date? Basically, the DBA tools, the DBA tools side of the Twitch and YouTube streams are going to be more prevalent. I haven't figured out all of the topics that I'm going to do on this, but I've received your guidance, and I will actually be publishing different streams by name so that you can know what is going to be streamed. Because on the DBA tools one, I do want questions in PolGab so that we can answer questions. But I also want to introduce you to a commandlet or more per time so that we can get better at these commandlets that may be obscure, or maybe we don't know what they do or whatever. So I'm working on that. And if I know the ones that I'm going to do, which I've been advised to get a schedule out there, I will put them in the list of my times, right? I'll put them in the schedule so that you know what topics are being held rather than just office hours and stuff like that. It will be office hours, but it will be very much a topic-based thing for DBA tools. For this Ask Me Anything, it will be Ask Me Anything, and we'll just go from there. These questions have been great, so it's been fun to interact this way. So thanks, Brian. I'm going to make sure that I get that out there for you. So SQL Dev DBA in chat, SSIS is great once everything is in place, especially with additional components like King's Waysoft, but for probing queries and polls in the first phases, PowerShell is so much quicker to get started, and that is absolutely true. I echo every word. We actually had a pass, the late pass way back. Aaron Nelson and another had a smackdown with SSIS and PowerShell on who was faster to ETL data, and actually PowerShell won. The things that they were doing, PowerShell was fast to bring it up and fast to tear it down, where SSIS was a little more whatever. And actually the speed was faster with PowerShell. It actually won. So I was pretty impressed. But I use PowerShell enough that unless I'm going to do something that's business sustainable and other things, I probably won't use SSIS in the case that I probably won't use SSIS unless I'm going to do some sustainable things. PowerShell is so much faster in development and quick execution that I save so much time doing that for proof of concepts, or, hey, I wonder if this will work. Or if I pull data for my DBA stuff, I pull data for trending. I still do it in PowerShell. Could I do it in SSIS? Sure. Would I? No, not. I'm going to have to maintain SSIS. The other piece of SSIS is that if I change versions of SQL, I have to upgrade my package. And that's not so great of an experience yet. And so I will still opt for PowerShell if I can. If I'm doing complex stuff in SSIS, then yeah, okay, I'll fire up SSIS and we'll do some development. But until then, I won't. I typically won't do that for ETL stuff. That's all the questions I have in PolGab now, and regardless of the title, I see DBADuck. I joined. Yeah, nice. Thanks, SQL Dev DB. I appreciate your support. It's super fun to get out here now. Let's see. SQL Dev DBA says in chat, does this thing with import data where everything is nvarchar max when you import, but if you use it responsibly as a stage cable, you're all set. Yeah. So that is one of the drawbacks of doing the write DBA DB table data, is that you can say auto create, and that's the easy way, right? So in my opinion, here's how I use it. I write the data table, say auto create, and then I just alter the table to make the nvarchar maxes not nvarchar maxes. And then I, any other data type, typically the ints and the big ints are decently obvious in the way it does it. It's not always the case, but typically you get ints and big ints and monies and stuff like that pretty simply. But every string is an nvarchar max, because in .NET everything is nvarchar max. I mean, string is nvarchar by default. It's Unicode friendly, and then it's big. So I sometimes will quickly let it auto create the table, and then I'll just write scripts in PowerShell that will go modify my columns. If I see an inverter max, I make it whatever, right? So I do that because it's easier to just let it auto create it. And then from then on, I just insert it, and it will opt for the table definition. Sometimes I do. If I have a specific thing I want it, I don't want it to be an int, I want it to be a small int, then I will actually create my table to stuff in. And that works too. But I love the write DB table data. And SQL Server module has one as well. That's write-SQL table data. And they work fantastic. They're just fast. They use SQL Bolt copy behind the scenes, and you can tweak it with batch sizes and commit sizes and timeouts and all that. So to me, why would I ever fire up SSIS to shove data into a table? I wouldn't stuff it out to it as CSV and then suck it in. I would just let her rip, PowerShell. The one caveat to that, I'll tell you, is that if you, I think I covered this in another office hours, but if you want to use that prolifically, make sure you're doing things in a data table. When you invoke query, an invoke-DBA query, and you pull data out, just make sure you do as data table. By default, both SQL Server and DBA tools do it rows, do a row. And the problem with that is that SQL Bolt copy only accepts data tables. So what happens behind the scenes is you'll pipe that in, or you'll use that as an input object, and it will have to create a data table on the back end. It'll have to create a .NET data table, and then it will stuff it in. So you could end up with some pretty decent memory usage and also some time. So if you have 100,000 rows or 50,000 rows and you want to stuff it in, if it's not in a data table, it's going to have to create one, which means double the memory, maybe even more, because .NET tables are a structured thing, so it has a lot of moving parts, columns and names and indexes and all that stuff. So it could take long to create the data table, then it stuffs the data in there, and then it uses the data table to stuff it in the table. So if you're going to do a lot of it with DBA, write-DBA table data, just plan ahead, right? If it's an automation. If it's a down and dirty, sometimes you don't care. It's 50,000 rows, 10,000 rows, 5,000 rows, 2,000 rows, 100 rows. Just let her rip. That's why we have speed, right? That's why we have memory and CPU. But when you're planning automation, just get used to creating a data table in PowerShell and putting the columns in, and then stuffing the data in there, and then ripping it to SQL with the write-DBA table data. So that's the only caveat I have. Let's see. Right now, I think we are out of time. I don't see any more chat messages, but thank you, SQL Dev DBA and Morse 314. And on the question side, Brian Boosie, which I know who you are on the other side of aliases, but thank you both for taking time to put questions up there and have a great discussion. This has been really good to have things to talk about instead of making things up for 30 minutes. Please spread the word. Have people join and follow, and we'll have some fun. We're here according to the schedule every Monday and Tuesday, and the 2 different topics, but hopefully this was helpful to you both and to the other viewers, and we will see you next week at the same time. Have fun, and please PowerShell on as well as SQL on. It's been fun. Thank you very much. Have a great day.